So before each scrim, for these first couple of weeks at the very least, we're going to be doing a pre-scrim meeting. Normally, if we were in person, I'd like to do this not directly before the scrims, but I think online, this is the only way for it to work. So it's just going to be half an hour before by default. If there's less or if there's more, I'll make sure to let you know as soon as possible and it will be updated in the calendar. But for now, it's just going to be half an hour before each scrim. So for today, the first thing I wanted to talk about is we're going to look at the schedule. Now, this is not like set in stone at the moment. This is just penciled in. I think there's still maybe one more person who needs to fill out all the doodle things to see what days that they're free before our first competitive game. But this is how it's roughly looking. If there's any problems with this, if anything is wrong, we'll talk about it again after the scrim. So let me know then rather than discussing it now, as we've got a bunch of things that I'd like to kind of touch on before we get started. So week 0, the week we're starting now, is going to be scrims today, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Then we're going to have a couple of days where we can't scrim, and then 3 scrim days into the first competitive match on the Wednesday. So Tuesday, it's my birthday, so I probably won't be here for the end of scrims. We've got something booked in the evening that's been booked for a long time, but I'll leave you in Thomas's hands. And on Thursday, we might only be able to start scrimming a bit later. But the goal for week 1, or week 0, I should say, is going to be about building our identity and how we approach the draft. Now, I've spoken to each of you about this individually, but I'll say it again here. On a lot of teams, what we do is we just play games and hope that our identity kind of gradually reveals itself by, I don't know, the way we win and the way we lose. What we're going to do here instead is we're going to actually have a discussion about it and actively pick a direction that we all want to go. And then that will be the way that the reviews go, the way that the drafts goes, the way that the individual sessions go, will all be building towards that specific identity. So that's what we're going to focus on the most this week. Then in week 1, it's going to be about the processes of that identity. So if we decide we want to be a really active and aggressive team, what does that mean? How are we going to approach early game? How are we going to approach objectives? Those kind of things. And the last goal, for week 1 will be working out the details of the patch. So those 2 solo queue days, they're after the patch comes out as well. So that's good for us. That means we're going to have a lot more data to be able to actually kind of lock in our champions. In terms of the formats, in case people didn't see, the group stages are going to be best of 1. So the first 4 or plus tiebreakers games are going to just be best of 1 in regular. And then after that, it's going to be fearless. So we are going to do fearless today in preparation, for the best ofs. But that's the schedule for the first couple of weeks. And then after that, we'll try and keep it consistent. We'll try and have same off day and then scrims on all the other days. So before we start today, I want to go over a few things about, working with me, the way that I approach scrims and the way that we're going to approach practice as we go forward. The first of which is that I like using real names. So if that's a problem, just let me know. I'm happy to use your in-game name if you prefer that, but my default will always be real names. The other thing that's worth saying is I apologize in advance if I butcher the pronunciation of your name. So please just correct me if I'm saying it wrong. The next thing is that we will together build a culture of how we want to be, how we want to communicate, how we want to do reviews, how we want to talk to each other, how we approach out-of-game stuff or punishments, things like that. But for now, we don't have the time really to go through a big process of doing that. So instead, I'm just going to give you a few things that for me are kind of non-negotiable behaviors that I would expect from each of you. The first one, topical for today, punctuality. So for me, it's really important that whenever we're starting off a day, that we all can be here on time. And whatever you need to do that, please just make sure it happens. If that means you have to act like we're actually going to start 15 minutes before we do so that you can really make sure you're ready, or it means I'm going to have my friends remind me in case I forget, or set alarms or anything like that, it's really, really important because there's quite a lot of us here and there's more coaches kind of doing stuff behind the scenes as well. So if you're 5-10 minutes late, it's not actually just 10 minutes of the team's time that you're wasting. Because there's 7+ of us, it's actually over an hour rather than just 10 minutes. So we have to think about time in a slightly different way. That's a really big one for me. So going forward, please, whatever you need to do to make sure that you're here on time. The next thing is openness. There's 2 aspects of this. The first one is openness when it comes to other people. So I know this is difficult when we're online. We don't know each other. There's a bunch of people in a group. But please find someone that you can talk to and that you can actually be open with. Now, Hopefully that can be me, and that's a great use for the reflections that you all have. But even if it's not, please find someone else. There's managers, there's other coaches, of course, talk to each other as well. The easiest way for a team that's online to kind of start to fall apart and start to have cracks is if we're not open with the problems when they arise, and then when they come back, they're much bigger problems, and so on. So please find someone that you can be open with on the team, even if it isn't me. The last one for me that's a non-negotiable is honesty. By this, I just mean doing what we say we'll do. So that goes from the positive aspect of things, but also if there's something that I ask of you that you know you really don't want to do, or you know you can't do for whatever reason, just tell me. That's always going to be preferable. That's always going to be the better way to do things than to, get to the end of the day and say, oh, I didn't quite get to it. I'll probably get to it tomorrow, and so on and so on. So just being straight with each other, being honest about what you're going to do, that's really, really crucial. Last thing in terms of the practicalities for working with me, I have mentioned this before, but we're all going to be on different schedules. Mine's going to be a very kind of un-esportsy schedule, which means that I'll be working in the mornings, and I assume most of you will probably do most of your like extra work outside of scrims after scrims, whereas for me, it's all going to come beforehand. That's another reason why I've set up these reflection channels. You can record something when you're done with your day, if that's midnight, 1 a.m., whatever, and I'll record it when I start at 7 a.m. I don't expect you to reply to it then, but that also means that when scrims are done, after the debrief, after any chats that we have to have straight away, I'm going to be trying, at least, to turn off my Discord and not be there for messages, knowing that I'll get to them in the morning before the next day. For me, it's really important to have time to switch off and to try and think about other things, which will allow me to actually perform much better in scrims than if I just do more and more work. I'm not someone who just makes myself busy in the attempt to get stuff done. I'd rather be precise with what I'm doing. Then in terms of how we're going to actually approach scrims, both for today and for further forward, first thing about me is that I really love structure and I love process. I think you already all know this by now, even with a tiny bit of interacting together. We're going to make everything that we do conscious. By this, I mean we're going to know what we're doing and we're going to know why we're doing it. This is because, let's say something goes wrong, we'll be able to re-examine exactly what we did and why we did it, and we're able to make small adjustments to learn as much as possible. But if something goes right, we're able to repeat it, and it just becomes much easier to actually progress in that manner. This comes to the game, but it also comes to everything. How we approach scrims, how we approach draft. We're going to try and go through in the same way, even though, of course, what will be said as we go through will change, but we keep it conscious. However, I'm very aware that there's a massive downside to this structure and to this like rigidity and logic. Someone I really like listening to, would highly recommend, a guy called Rory Sutherland, has this line which I really like. The danger with logic is that it kills magic. Now, on this team, there's a huge amount of individual experience, a huge amount of different perspectives, different ways of seeing the game and uniqueness that I really want to make sure that we're taking full advantage of. So if I come in from the very beginning and say, this is how we're going to approach the game, this is how we're going to approach scrims, practice, draft, it's never going to be as productive, and it's going to kill off that uniqueness that you guys can all bring. So as much as possible, especially at the beginning, I'm going to do what I would describe no performative coaching. So the easiest way to actually show you what I mean is to talk about some specific examples. Now, most teams, after the draft is done, so Thomas is here, he's going to be doing the draft, I would say something, the coach says something. But for today, I'm not going to be talking after the draft because, yes, it's my time to talk. A lot of coaches use it as an opportunity to demonstrate how much we know about the game, say, okay, this is how we should approach the early game, this is how we should approach objectives, whatever. Now, in the future, I almost certainly will be saying stuff to you after the draft is done. But right now, I don't know what that is because I want to listen to you without me and work out where our strengths are, what are the things we already know, or what are the extra things that you might need a bit of reminding on, or maybe you've got it all covered and all I need to say is good luck, basically, as the game starts. So I want to make sure that we're not putting structure in for its own sake. We're not doing coaching for just like the performative aspect of it, so we can all like impress each other or anything like that. We need to really find out how much you guys, or how you think about the game, not even how much, but how you think about it. The same thing will be true in terms of the reviews, especially today and over the next few days. I'm probably going to mostly just be asking you questions about how you think about this certain situation. We're probably only going to take 1 or 2 key situations from the game with the idea of our goal that I'll get onto in a second. But it'll mostly be about asking you rather than laying something on top. The reason I tell you this now is because I don't want anyone to panic and think, oh my God, we're going so slowly. We're not covering all these different areas. We go through it this way, which means when we start to cover stuff, when we start to put that process back in, it's the real best version of it because it's come from all of us. It's not just my opinion on the game. It's what's the NORD way of playing the early game. It's not what's John's way. So last thing then, the goal for today, the bit of structure that we do have is by the end of the day, I want us to see if we can have a good answer to this question: how does League of Legends work? So as I mentioned, this first week is going to be about finding our identity. And before we start to pick an identity and say, okay, we're going to be a team that highly values gold, or we're going to be a team that highly values tempo, we need to actually go through how do we actually all understand how the game works and try and agree on some sort of structure. So what we're going to do now is, for now, we're just going to spend 10 minutes discussing it. The discussion is hard. I've done this before with people. It's a difficult and potentially painful discussion. But as we go through the day, whenever we look at a VOD or a play, we're going to look at it with the systems that we talked about. So I don't know if anyone had a chance to look at this yesterday when I posted it in the group, or have a little bit think about it. For now, we'll just do an open discussion so anyone can shout out, especially from a team point of view, what are the systems that actually make League of Legends work?
Anyone want to start? Or
I can start if everyone wants to
you
try.
can go for it. I can go after
Thank you, Xmatty. I'll go first. I mean, I think in general, in like a very plain perspective, it's a game of like resources.
Mm-hmm.
So, in general, the team that acquire more resources or deny more resources will win. And obviously, the resources are like gold, experience. I think those are the 2 big ones.
Cool.
I think that's like the baseline.
Great. Anyone else have stuff that fundamental systems of the game?
Like, I can say, like, obviously from like the really basic level, the goal of League is to destroy the enemy nexus, right? Which requires killing the enemy towers. But like, in order to do that, like, it's about, with whatever champs you have in the game, it's about finding the setup that gives you the most priority possible. So whether that's like dematching the enemy or like how you want to play the map.
Okay.
Like what way actually allows you to end the game faster than the enemy, so they have to answer you, and kind of always playing that battle with the enemy. So like that could be, your team could be strong at going to objectives, so you need to like group up. Or if the enemy's is, then obviously you need to dematch them and find whatever setup is strongest for you in fights or like on the map.
Yeah. It's like knowing what our comp wants to do as well.
Yeah.
Cool. Anyone else? Any other systems for the game?
What I usually like is just basically like having a very clear win condition and then trying to play as high tempo as you can.
Okay.
Like for me, tempo is one of the most important things.
Great. What does tempo mean? It's an annoying question, but it's always a little bit, I think, different with each person. So what does tempo mean to you?
And for me, it's basically just being faster on the map. Like timing resets a bit faster than the enemy. Or giving up a wave. For example, as a side laner, I can just push in a wave, make the enemy catch it, and that I'm creating tempo for myself. And then with my tempo, I can transition it into like a team tempo by grouping with the team and making sure we get pushes in other lanes as first as well. Because when you're first pushing, then you're forcing the enemy to catch, right?
Yep.
So that's where you generate something where you have like an active sequence compared to them, and they have to be the ones on the defensive.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it still needs to be with the context though that you're like able to, like, so for example, you could all base, but if the enemy is still like pushing a side that you need to answer to, then even though you base first, they'll still get tempo because you need to answer to them.
Yep.
So like basing first in a position where you can threaten objectives or ending the game faster than the enemy.
Mm. And you guys have mentioned there, like the enemy has to catch or that kind of thing a couple of times. And that's because of these systems, right? They need to be acquiring resources. So they need to, when you crash a wave in, you're not physically forcing them to collect that wave, but they can't leave it because they need to get golden experience. And also because you're going to threaten killing towers and eventually killing the Nexus. Okay. Anything else, Lucas or Frederick? Do you have anything?
I mean, vision control, I guess. I think vision is really important in the game. Because as long as you can see where they're moving on the map, it's very easy to make tempo. And as a jungler, the first 5-10 minutes of the game, vision matters a lot. And also like stuff like, I mean, there's so many things in League of Legends, right? But like it also like lane swaps, level 1 invades, etc., etc., which also matters a lot for competitive.
Yeah.
Communication in general is also very important, especially in constructed play.
Yeah.
True.
And a lot of times these things feed into the other things, right? So you mentioned vision control, because if I could give you a hack where you know where the enemy is, you were saying you can always be like faster on the map, or you can always have more tempo when you have that. And communication as well helps, because we know when stuff will happen rather than just as it is happening. Like, okay, I will crash this wave in top, or I will slow push this, or whatever. So again, it relates back to these other ones as well. Does anyone have a different definition for tempo that they had in their head, rather than specifically being faster on the map? I guess you would say tempo comes from making enemy crash waves, or like grouping when we have a better group, or not grouping when we have better split. Does anyone have different things that they would have in terms of their definition of tempo?
I mean, I think we all probably see it the same way in game.
Yeah.
But I think out of game, I would say, like, at least to me, tempo would be, if we have tempo, that means that we have free time, basically. So that means that we don't have to like deny or acquire resources. It's basically time off from having to do something.
Cool. Yeah.
So for me, that would mean like getting wards. If I'm up tempo, I'll get vision without being punished for it.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, punish being like without losing gold or XP for it.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite general, but yeah, I guess like tempo to me is like the enemy has to react to what you're doing. Like kind of means you have tempo for me.
Okay.
Can you also generate tempo by knowing what the enemy wants to do?
Good question.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you can. I mean, if you know that they want to push top wave and you can leave it, you can like lose resources in the moment, but you could probably get more resources after. Like, so for example, say we know that their Fiora is on top wave and wants to take our top tower. That means that we can also choose to give it and go mid and take the mid tower, right?
Yeah.
We're basically like using that to create tempo for mid.
Yeah. So that means...
Yeah, you can always give something to get tempo, yeah.
Yeah.
And so that means, in a way, tempo, in some senses, it covers the whole map, but also it can be specific. Because Fiora in that example is putting her time into top lane, which means if our top lane is not there, we have extra time to put somewhere else. So like you said, tempo over mid lane, rather than just tempo as like a kind of on and off switch.
Yeah, you can always sacrifice something in League to get something else. I think it's not like a... Yeah, it's not like if we're down tempo, we can't do anything. It's more like how much do we want to give up to get tempo back or something like that.
Okay, perfect. Right, so as we say, that's the start. And as Matty, you mentioned, like once we, I think, sorry if I misattributed that. Once we start to look at the actual game, it could be that we'll have a more similar understanding or a clearer understanding once we take some of these examples. So what we're going to do today is, once we have a few like key moments of each game, I just want to basically carry on that discussion of like, okay, so what do we mean when we're talking about tempo in this situation? Seems like that's where a lot of it comes from, but we will also talk about the win conditions. We'll talk about communication and vision control and stuff like that too. For me, I mean, again, it's all very similar. Tempo for me is just time. So when we talk about having tempo, that means we're talking about having a time advantage. But everything that we do as a team, in my opinion, my version of the game, is either about generating a time advantage or recognizing where we have them, or it's about using it. So everything's either generating time or using time, and the rest of it kind of falls into that. But like I said, it's not about my version of the game. It's going to be about our version of the game. So I'm going to let Thomas talk briefly about the draft, and then we'll get into the first game and carry on this discussion with some actual examples and plays that we can break down.